see you. If I missed you a couple weeks ago when I was here, my name's Josiah. Hi, nice to see you again. I am married to Chelsea, who's not here. She's home with some sick kids, but she's Andy and Toby's niece. And I work as an estimator, and so glad to be here with you guys this morning. Merry Christmas. Guys, can you believe it? We're already starting the Christmas season. I went and got my tree yesterday. I tried to go to like a local place like right next to my house, and I went in, picked out a tree, and I said, how much does it cost? And he told me the cost, and I repeated the cost and said, wow. And then I left. And I went to Costco. I just couldn't afford it. So, but anyway, we got a tree. I just cannot believe that it's already Christmas time. This year has flown by. We're celebrating, the church historically has always taken this time to celebrate the season of Advent. Advent means coming. It's a time when we look back on Christ's first coming in the flesh, and a time when we look forward to Christ's second coming in glory. And in between the two, we reflect upon the fact that God is with us here now. So this season, this Advent season that we're kicking off right now, we're going to look the next 4 weeks at what it means for our lives that God is with us. And in the coming weeks, we'll look at things like peace and love and joy. And this week, we're talking about hope. The fact that God is with us means that we have hope. But if you're anything like me, we do this every year, right? We talk about the same things every year. And it is difficult for me to take the idea of hope out of the church and have it impact the 99% of my life that is lived outside of church. I think for me, it's difficult for two reasons: monotony and difficulty. If you're anything like me, almost every day of my life looks about the same. I wake up, I read a little Bible, I do a few emails, I take care of the kids, I go to work, do about the same thing every day at work. I come home, get the kids to bed, watch a show, and go to bed. Reset. Wake up, you know what I mean? Do the same thing. And on the Saturday, you take away the work, but then you still do everything else, right? We live a lot of our days the same. And probably 99% of our life can be categorized under boring, right? Monotonous. It's just the same thing over and over again. It can get boring. And it's hard to take these great ideas about hope and infuse them into the monotony of our life, right? I don't know if you can relate. The second thing is difficulty. A lot of us, right, go through seasons of times that are hard, that are difficult. There's pain and disappointment, and you pray and you hope that things will be different, but a lot of times it's not, right? I mean, think about the world that we live in. Generation after generation after generation, the same evil, the same corruption, the same sicknesses, the same everything happens over and over and over again. And we look at our spiritual lives and we battle with the same sins over and over and over and over again. It's hard to take hope out of church and infuse it into our lives because a lot of times things are difficult. A lot of times things are monotonous. So this season, I don't want to just stick with head knowledge. I don't want to just repeat the same thing, the same sermon that you've heard a million times over again. My prayer this morning is that we would take a look at hope, and it would go more than head knowledge, but it would infuse that 99% of our life that is lived outside of church. We want hope to characterize our lives. When we wake up, when we take care of the kids, when we go to work, when we're struggling, when we're dealing with the same sin over and over and over again, we want hope there. So as we kick off this Advent series, let's take a look at one passage that answers two questions for us about hope. Why we can have hope, and how we can live lives characterized by hope. Why and how. If you have your Bibles, open with me to Luke 1. gear up because we're going to read a nice long story. Okay? So just stick with me. It's a good story. I'll try to use inflection and make it interesting. But this story begins at the beginning. We're going to take a look at the gospel account of Luke, right? Luke is writing. He begins this little introduction that tells you he's writing to make people confident about Jesus. And he begins this story with a story about two old people who are going to have a baby. Two old people who are going to have a baby, Zechariah and Elizabeth. And in this story, I want us to have eyes to look for why we can have hope and how we can live lives filled with hope. So let's begin at Luke 1, verse 5. I promise I'll use some inflection. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But, here's the drama, they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. Now, while he, Zechariah, was serving as priest before God when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Excuse me. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense, and there appeared to Zechariah an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, Zechariah, don't be afraid, for your prayer has been heard. And your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John, and you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great before the Lord, and he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Spirit even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to their Lord, their God, and he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. And Zechariah, trembling, says to the angel, how shall I know this? I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And the angel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and God himself sent me to speak to you and to bring you this good news. If you want a sign, you're going to be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. And the people were waiting outside for Zechariah, and they were wondering at his delay in the temple. And when he came out, he went, and he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. And he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And when his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After these days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked upon me to take away my reproach from the people. 2 old people having a baby. Why can we have hope? Because God is with us. I think the first thing that Luke wants us to know about why we can have hope because God is with us is because God sees and he cares. God sees and he cares. What's going on in this passage? We see 2 parallel stories about monotony and difficulty going on at the same time. The first and the most surface level is Zechariah and Elizabeth got married, and their whole life they wanted a family. They prayed and they longed and they felt shame and they felt excluded from the community, and they didn't know how they were going to be provided for in their old age, and they longed and they longed and they prayed and they prayed, God, give us a kid, and no answer, no kid, just disappointment. And you can tell by Zechariah's response to the angel that he had probably given up, right? I mean, he's like, well, I'm an old guy, that's it. We're done. Every day was just like the same, just like the day before. Monotony and difficulty. There was no answer, and it just felt like the same thing kept happening over and over again. The same prayers kept going up over and over again, and it was just the same. And the story underneath the surface is a story about Israel, who had believed at this time that for 400 years there had been no word from God since the last prophet Malachi, right? Nothing. They had gone into exile and now come back, but were under Roman oppression, still not living the way they had hoped God would provide for their nation, right? They were supposed to be a city on a hill, that the whole world would come to them to know who God was, and that God would bless the whole world through this nation, but they were oppressed and no word from God, and the same thing kept happening generation after generation after generation. It was hard for them too to have hope. But into this period of silence and desperation and monotony and difficulty, an angel comes and says, "Your prayer has been heard." Do you ever wonder if God sees in the darkness, in the times when you feel utterly alone, in the times when nothing is going like you thought it would go, in the time when it just feels like the same thing over and over and over again? God's word to Zechariah, to Israel, and to you is that your prayer is heard. He's there, and he sees, and he cares, and you're not alone. He loves you. The second reason why we can have hope is not just because God sees and he cares and he loves, but it's because God is indeed working out his plan, and he's including me and he's including you. What do we see in this story? We see God answering a prayer in ways that exceeded the prayer. Right? For years, Zechariah and Elizabeth had longed for a child. And they wanted a child for them, right? They just wanted a child. But they had no idea that the way God would answer that prayer is that he would use their particular situation for the advancement of his kingdom, that their son might prepare the way for the Messiah who was going to change the world and save the world. They had no idea the amazing things that God was going to do through those prayers. They didn't get it. But God used their particular situation, and he used it to fulfill his plan. And we have hope today because the same God who can use old people to have a kid is the same God that can use our particular situations and our and the intricacies of our lives for his purpose. His plan is still the same today. He is restoring the world. He is going to come and judge the world and set all things right and recreate everything that he might live with us, those who are in Christ, for all of eternity in bliss and in life. He's going to make all things right. But in the middle of it, when things are hard and monotonous, it's hard to have hope because we don't always know why he answers some prayers and why he doesn't. We don't always know why he allows some pain and struggle and why he takes some away. And we don't always know why he allows some evil and some not. We don't. And it is hard. And I think it's at this point that we don't want to belittle that because there is so much suffering and pain in this world. We really have no idea. And I don't know your situation. But what we do know, and we can bank our lives on, is that God will fulfill his plan of salvation for the world. And one day, when he comes to set all things right, we can all guarantee that we will agree with his decisions, that it will be okay and it will make sense and everything will be right and every tear will be wiped away. And that's the hope that we have, that God will work out his plan, and he is including us. We just may not see the whole thing right now. We can have hope because God is with us, because he sees, he cares, and he loves us. He is working out his plan, and he has invited us to be part of it. But we don't want to stop just with head knowledge about the hope. We want that to grow deeper into our lives and affect the 99% of our life that is lived outside of the church. And the question becomes, how do we live lives of hope? How do we live out this hope? Let's take a peek back in the story. I think Luke gives us 2 clues about how to live out our hope in the day-to-day parts of our lives, in the mundane and in the difficult. The first is found in verse 6. I think the first way to live out hope is through faithful obedience to God. It's not the most flashy sermon point. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. Why is that verse in there? What does that mean? What did Zechariah and Elizabeth do with their disappointment and their unanswered prayer and in their difficulty and in the monotony of their life? They obeyed what God had put right in front of them. They just obeyed. And they were faithful. They didn't understand everything that was going on, but they said, you know what, God, we know what you're calling us to do today in the monotony and in the difficulty of today, so let's just do that. You might say, Josiah, how is obedience a choice for hope? Right? How do those things interact? Well, what are you doing when you choose to obey God and not disobey? What's happening in that moment? You are making a choice, right? You are making a choice that says, God, your story and your purposes and your plan are better than the alternative. Right? It's a yes to God and it's a no to the world. If I'm in a conflict with my wife and everything in me wants to get back and get some revenge and say some hurtful words, but if in that moment I say, no, God, I choose your will, I choose your way, and I choose that your story is correct and not the story of the world, which is just personal fulfillment and personal happiness, then I choose hope. Because personal fulfillment and personal happiness will always lead to despair, because it will never fulfill, right? But if we, in the moments of obedience, if we choose God's story, and if we choose hope in God, it will lead to hope. That's what Zechariah and Elizabeth did in this story. They said, God, we don't understand, and we don't know what to do, but we will faithfully obey you in the day to day. The second thing that I think beyond faithful obedience, this passage tells us about living out hope in the minute by minute decisions of our day is prayer. I think it's interesting that the one thing that the angel tells Zechariah is that his prayer has been heard. You know, it's as if God saw all the hours, all the heartache, and all the hurt, right? He was there in the most intimate moments. God saw their prayers. And I know that you and I, we do some of the same things, right? What are we doing when we pray? It's like obedience. We are directing our lives toward God and saying no to alternatives, right? We are saying, God, I'm experiencing some difficulty. I'm experiencing some hurt. I'm experiencing some pain. But instead of turning to all the other things that I could, I'm now turning to you. I believe your story. I believe that what you're doing in my life, I can have hope in that. Like for me, I think the one place that I turn when I'm experiencing difficulty and in trouble, and I don't want, and I kind of want to escape, is I just go to media, right? I just watch some YouTube videos. I can just turn. I mean, it's as simple as that. Where are you directing your heart in those moments, right? And prayer is a way of saying yes to God. Prayer is a way of choosing hope. So, we're coming into Christmas. It's a season where we do a lot of the same things. We go through a lot of the same traditions. It's a season of expense. We spend a lot. We're very busy. It's stressful. The question is, how in the world, in this busy and difficult season, are we going to choose hope? How are we going to do it? How will we play this out in our lives now when we've done the same thing year after year after year after year? What is going to change? At least for me, I know that I can't muster it up. And I can't tell you 3 simple ways to fix your hope. You know what I mean? I can't just say, you got to do this, and try harder. Like, that's not how we're going to end this sermon. The only way that we are ever going to have any hope penetrating the mundane and the difficulty in our lives is if Jesus breaks in. And he infiltrates those parts of our lives and he gives us hope. What did he do to Zechariah? Zechariah had no idea it was going to come that day, right? Israel had no idea that the Messiah was going to come right then. We need to ask Jesus individually, as a church, as a community, to enter into the mundane and the difficulty of our lives, and we need to ask him to give us hope. I've got a 3-year-old, almost, in a couple days, and there are like a million times every day when I'm with him that we'll be walking around and something will happen to him that will trigger him and he'll kind of flip out, right? I mean, it's just like the whole world is over. And it could be like he can't, I mean, there's just too many examples to name. But anyway, you get the idea, right? He just loses it. And he forgets who's with him. Right? In that moment, he becomes so consumed with whatever like he didn't get a piece of food, or you know what I mean? Like he didn't get to play with the toy that his sister took or something. And he gets so consumed by that he just cannot see that his dad and his mom are there with him and they want the best for him. And they've got him under control. You know what I mean? They've like, I've got him. Like I can handle it, But he just can't see it in that moment. And do you know what he needs? He needs his dad to come right up to his face and actually turn his face to him and look at him and say, Asher, it's going to be okay. I've got you. In this Christmas season, we need Jesus to grab our faces and say, it's going to be okay. It is. I've got you. I care. I'm big enough. I'm working out my plan and I want you to be a part of it. Just come follow me. And I don't know how that's going to happen for you in this Christmas season. I mean, it just happens differently, right? But I think what we can do is we can just ask for help. We can try to position ourselves and posture ourselves that we could be aware that Jesus is right here with us in the mundane and in the difficult. We can ask. And so what would it look like as a Lifepoint church, right? if we became aware of the hope that is ours because Jesus is with us today? What would it change about the monotony of our lives, about how we raise our kids, about how we do our work, about how we go about our family time, about what traditions we choose to do around Christmas? What would it change if we were full of hope? Now let's just take a little bit of time together and pray that Jesus would break into our lives this Christmas season and give us hope even now. Pray with me.